IVM.
Hello and welcome to Simblified, the podcast that claims to make you smarter, but in reality, it just makes you feel smarter because of the quality of its hosts. This is Tony, and I'm joined by Naren to give you the proper Goldilocks principle feel. Naren is too wise, I am too silly, and therefore, you, dear listener, should feel just the right amount of smart. Naren, good to be back.
Good to be back. Great to be back, in fact. And first of all, I think we owe the Simplified audience an apology. But there were a lot of things. Well, one is a small virus outbreak that happened in Malaya.
I don't know if you've heard about it.
Yeah. So, but it's great. And it's, one thing that I really want to share with the listeners of Simplified is that I don't know if the podcast makes them any smarter. It definitely makes us smarter because we end up reading out, in the process of researching whatever we're talking about.
Absolutely.
You learn a lot of very interesting things. And I think we have one such today, right?
Yeah. Hopefully. We're starting with the one that I have done research on. Okay, air quotes clearly not visible over an audio podcast, but that's the hope. But Naren, we've been off for 3 months and we had a 1 month break in between also. And I think the roster is now down to 2 hosts, but we'll still soldier on. Just like the world of sports has been coping. I think we did an episode on what will be the future of sports once. But sports is now well and truly back. And how has it been enabled is the topic of this particular episode. Naren, have you been following any of the sports that's been happening?
Yeah, I've been sort of following IPL.
Yeah.
And my son makes me watch English Premier League all the time. That's going on now.
Yes.
But the IPL thing is like you can't escape the conversation on it. You have to keep abreast. So that's what I've been doing.
Yeah.
I get stares from my colleagues in my office. If they're discussing something, I put on a blank face. I really get...
but it's good to be back in office as well, right? I am still working from home, but everything's back up.
Are you exclusively working from home or do you go and
Yeah, exclusively. Unlike the players, I think we'll cover a few different leagues and how they've been happening. The NBA happened after it was paused in March. And how they did it versus how tennis is versus how IPL is, and all of them have had a fair amount of success, right? And how have they been able to do this in COVID times is what we are talking about. I think for NBA it was much easier because they just hired out one large stadium, or the Disney bubble as it's called, basically the Walt Disney World in Florida. And that makes it so much easier, right? Because a bio bubble is essentially a secure place that's sealed off. You can do that physically, nothing like it. So the NBA's case was interesting because they had stopped mid-season. And when they had to resume, basically out of the 30 teams, they deleted 8 teams. It was called a delete 8, basically. Teams that didn't have a chance to make the playoffs. But 22 teams then got into this particular bio bubble, as it's called. And essentially, all of them had some certain protocols to follow, right? So initially, you would need to get the players to the particular team's home cities itself. And then do continuous testing for like 1 week. And then how you get into workouts and stuff like that also was mandated. And once they reached Orlando, Florida, basically they had to pass 2 PCR tests in 24 hours to get out of the quarantine, right? And basically everyone was regularly tested. I think the tests were like once in 3 days, and you basically don't socialize and stuff like that. And interestingly, for the NBA itself, in between all of this, the Black Lives Matter sort of came into prominence as well, which also kind of helped that this was done in a bubble, because the players got a chance to get organized better and stuff like that. And in between, essentially there were like 2 or 3 days where matches had to be rescheduled because, there was a fair amount of protest against the violence and stuff like that. But the good part of this whole thing was that essentially when they were about to resume, the bubble was fully effective. They were leading up to the resumption of play in July 30th. For 2 consecutive weeks, no one was positive tested. And when the season ended by October 11th also, there were 0 cases of COVID-19. So
it worked. It worked very well.
Yeah. Absolutely worked. But also helps again that it was in one particular physical bubble itself, right? Unlike tennis, which famously Novak Djokovic had fronted a tournament in Belgrade, and that caused a massive coronavirus outbreak, actually. This was before the US Open and French Open and stuff like that. But for the US Open, again, and the French Open as well, you couldn't realistically have everyone housed in the same kind of place where the matches were happening as well, right? Because tennis is a different sport by design. You don't have teams, etc. And essentially what happened in the US Open, there was a case, one case that was reported. But by and large, again, it was fairly successful. Even the French Open, they were able to allow fans also inside, right? Limited set of fans. Actually, initially they wanted to bring in about 20,000 fans, but ultimately ended up with 1,000 fans.
I wonder they didn't yield to the temptation of changing the names from US Open to US Open.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the closed era of tennis, right? Yeah. So how they did it in New York, funnily enough, it is in the Billie Jean King Tennis Center, and it's actually called Flushing Meadows Corona Park. I mean, it's always been called that, not.
It is coincidentally called Corona.
Yeah. Very coincidentally. So in New York for the US Open, the USTA allowed players to live in rented homes, not necessarily at the official player hotels, because obviously you need secure zones. But they also had to then hire approved security personnel to be compliant with the restrictions, right? Which essentially meant that even for superstar tennis players, the cost became prohibitive. I mean, I wonder what that amount can be, right? So, but in the French Open, they basically said all of you have to stay in this one hotel, and that's how they managed it. And after all of this, there was another tournament in Russia. And essentially, these bubbles are only as good as how people respect them, right? So Sam Querrey actually traveled with his family, and just before the start of the tournament in Russia, he and his wife tested positive. So they were asked to sort of quarantine in a luxury hotel. But then suddenly he realized that the Russian authorities will, monitor them. And if there is a health risk or something, then they'll be transported to a secure facility. The term secure facility in Russia does not evoke too much confidence. So our man actually fled Russia in the middle of the night with his 7-month-old baby and his wife, he actually just escaped.
Ran away in terror.
Yeah. I mean, many people have retreated from Russia quite hastily without intending to, right? So,
you don't want to be in a secure facility.
Yeah. But the IPL actually is doing pretty well in these terms. And again, there are three parts to how they've been able to manage the, COVID situation in IPL, right? One is, of course, there is a standard operating procedure for everyone to follow. Secondly, there is the tracking and monitoring part as to how you sort of make sure that everyone is respecting the bubble. And third is the enforcement part. What happens if you break the bubble? So the tournament started in September, and we are recording on the 31st of October. So if the situation changes, we didn't jinx it, just to put it out there. But it will be on till November 11th. Basically the SOPs were that all the players and support staff were to be quarantined before they left. And the IPL this year is obviously happening in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Sharjah. 7 to 14 days they were quarantined in India. And before leaving for UAE, everyone was tested every 3 days, right? And then the teams went to Abu Dhabi for a 14-day quarantine and followed by a 6-day quarantine in Dubai. And essentially you had all of these Arogya Setu, which no one knows who made, and the local government app, etc. Which
best app ever, yeah. UNESCO declared best app ever.
Yeah. And essentially, this meant that by the time you sort of got together with the teams, you had a good 20-25 days separation into a bubble itself, right? So, interestingly, just before the tournament started, there was quite an outbreak in the Chennai Super Kings squad. Not necessarily the players per se, but support staff. And altogether, some 14 COVID cases were reported towards the beginning of the tournament, which was quite scary. But basically, once they sort of flew into UAE, basically the check-in luggage was sent in advance. Hand luggage was cling wrapped, and hotels had hazmat kits for the players, and no public restrooms, no shopping at duty free, etc. None of the good parts of Dubai, only the hotel rooms basically were open to them, and all of them used basically charter flights to get there with pre-packed.
Is that Zen Koan? No, if you go to Dubai, if you went to Dubai and you didn't duty free shop, did you go to Dubai at all?
Yeah.
It's just a wonder.
Yeah, it's a large gulf that they've not filled. Yeah. So, but basically, once they reach the hotels, you can't even go to other rooms, right? You have to quarantine yourself into the rooms. And during the 6/14 days of quarantine, as mandated by the UAE local government, there was no housekeeping, no in-room servicing, etc. And basically, the IPL, known for its excesses, had to really trim down and make sure that the game was more important and played, right? So how do you do it basically is the interesting part, which was previously the England West Indies series, right? Actually, Jofra Archer had violated the bio bubble by stopping over at his house, and he was actually dropped for the second test. And even in the series between England and Pakistan, one guy sort of went and met his family, and they have to self-isolate for 5 to 10 days and return with 2 negative tests. So in the IPL itself, how is it enabled? There's this company called Restrata, which is enabling the bubble. And every person who's entering this bubble is given a band with a specific tag, right? So you can either wear the tag on your neck or your wrist, depending on your preference. And this will track the location and movement of every person in relation to the other. And essentially, this works based on the sensor technology with beacons across. There are 12 hotels, 3 stadiums, and 1 main training ground. So this beacon technology previously was sort of used by marketing guys, right? So if you want to track in-store visits, for example, or if you want to send a notification to someone when they're near your store, etc. So it used to be done for fairly nefarious marketing activities, but now it's finally a good use case. So essentially,
how do they know that the sensor is not worn by someone else? One of the guys near our factory, he used to have his wife made him wear a Fitbit and told him that he has to. And what this guy did was he hired a full-time employee whose job was just to wear the Fitbit and walk up. And he got caught because one day he forgot to take the Fitbit back and he landed up home and the Fitbit was still running up and down and the wife could see it on.
Yeah, this reminds me of several years ago, a friend of mine basically, when you start out after engineering, you end up doing a software job that you really don't want to. And also attendance is quite optional, right? Like timings, etc. are flexible. So what our man did was he took out the chip in the ID card and tagged it along with his friend's ID. So he just stuck it on the back. So whenever he swipes in and swipes out, this guy's record also gets logged in. So it all went swimmingly well till one day they discovered that there were 2 immediate pings that happened. But till that point, he had a good scam running where he didn't have to go to work and got someone else to do proxy for him, which engineers...
Presumably this thing would have been factored into the beacon tracing thing because if it's a wearable sensor, then you don't want a person wearing it to change. There must be something to identify that.
Yeah.
I'm told that most devices they have unique heartbeat pattern.
So 2 parts. One is this beacon tracking is there. And this is to just ensure your movements are not outside the bio bubble, right? And there is really no scope for you to exit the bio bubble because, what can you do when the entire place is shut down? So this first part is, how it's classified and tagged to make sure you are seeing the movement of people within the bubble and amongst these 12 hotels, 3 stadiums and 1 training center, right? So each... that's basically 20 assets, and in each asset it's divided into multiple zones. So one stadium will have about 15 to 20 zones, and there are restrictions as to which zones you can move in and how and stuff like that. The second part is basically in case there is a positive case, right? This movement tracking will also enable you to do the contact tracing and stuff like that and contain it very quickly. And eventually, the hope is that this particular technology can be used to bring fans back into the stadium as well, right? So everyone gets the tag, and that is when our problems of people misusing it might be more serious because right now it is again a finite number of people and quite controllable.
And no one really has an incentive to sneak out
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the other part is that along with this tag, many teams, I think in the NBA and even in the IPL, there are these smart rings that you use, which basically, measures your heart rate, variability, temperature, respiratory rate, and stuff like that. What that does is it can even warn based on the variability that this person is likely to have COVID, right? It basically measures a risk score and alerts in
So it's multi-parameter thing,
Yeah. And of course, then the third part is how you enforce this, right? So in terms of every player has a daily health passport that they need to fill out. And in case they don't, there are severe fines as well for both the player and the franchise. So in case there is a unauthorized departure from the bubble itself, the first time the player has to undergo a 6-day quarantine. In case there's a second violation, the player is given a 1-match suspension. And if there's a third violation, he'll be just thrown out of the tournament, saying 3 strikes and you're out. Then the other thing is that you have to take these tests every 3 days, right? Because 3 to 5 days you have to take the test. And players will have a serious fine of like 60,000 rupees. I mean, not too big, but depending on which player you are. If you don't complete your daily health passport or wear the tracker, or if you miss a scheduled test. For the teams, it's more severe. If someone is allowed into the team's bubble, the team will have to pay 1 crore as for the first violation. And for the second and third violation, there will be a point deduction. So second violation, there will be 1 point deducted, and third violation, there will be 2 points deducted. I don't know what they'll do with CSK who have no points, but otherwise, that is the funda.
So they have to have tests every 3 days.
Yeah, three or 5 days, depending on which tournament you're talking about. Because you
super large nostrils they're gonna have. Really,
absolutely.
You know, people have tours inside nostrils.
And in case, and this has never happened, if there are 12 players available to form a team, then they will reschedule the game or will have to forfeit it. But thankfully, I think we are almost at the business end of the tournament and nothing has happened.
None of this has happened.
Yeah.
And they have to keep all the enforcement stuff there. Otherwise, no one's going to take it seriously. I guess it's just there to.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's very costly also, right? For instance, the NBA bubble, that cost $190 million for them to put in place. But obviously, the revenue far exceeded the investment.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah. So the opportunity cost wise, it's a pretty good investment. For the NBA, they basically got 1.5 billion in revenue. So that's pretty good ROI, right? In addition to all of the fun we have by waking up early.
Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened at all.
Yeah. But I think one of the things that is unstudied is the mental effect on the players, especially in sports like tennis, right? Which is in itself a pretty lonely kind of endeavor. And if you're cooped up in one particular room for a period of time and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean,
and you don't see, love at all other than on the court. That's cool.
Yeah, you can't make a racket.
You can't.
So that's it about the bubble. Short and sweet episode to start off with. Good to be back.
Yeah.
You want to sign off?
Yeah. stay safe, stay bubbled, and stay simplified. See you soon, hopefully. Yeah.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. It's been a really, really great week on the network. Let me make a couple of recommendations to you guys. Agla Station Adulthood, they have an extraordinary episode on relationships. Ritasha and Ayushi, as always, do a bang-up job. I think you'll really enjoy that conversation. Check out Edges and Sledges, where DJ Ashwin and Varun have been talking to fans from different IPL teams on every episode. It's a really, really interesting project they've taken on during the course of the IPL. And as it comes to a conclusion, I'm sure you'll love to hear their thoughts on the tournament as a whole. I want to mention Uncle Please Sit. They had a really great episode which dove into why is pollution so bad. And I think that given the circumstances we're dealing with right now, it makes a ton of sense to listen to that. Cyrus had a really great week on his show as well. On the Monday episode, he spoke to Raj and DK about all kinds of stuff. He was in one of their early movies. Definitely a fun conversation to check that out. And finally, let me talk to you about the Wire Talks with Siddharth Bhatia. We're very excited about this show. On the first episode, Jairam Ramesh is there having conversation with Siddharth Bhatia about the legacy of Indira Gandhi. I think you will really, really get something out of this. Do give it a listen. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Whether you're an established sports person or a budding one, or simply a sports enthusiast, join us, Tanvi and Shlok.
We are two passionate pro badminton players talking policy, mindset and everything sport.
So tune in to The Millennial Athlete every Monday.
Only on the IVM Podcast Network.
Trust us, it's gonna be lit.